structures, but also have an emphasis on preserving the structures that we have to get the most service life as we can out of them. I've been involved with the TSP2 partnership for quite some time. And this is great. So we have kind of a smaller audience for this presentation on bridge preservation today. And so I'd like it to be a little more informal, ask any questions you might have. And I guess kind of first, I'd be really interested to get a little bit more of an idea of our audience. We can run through and do some introductions. Andrew Reuter, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm with the City of Lincoln Asset Management, new into the bridge program for the last 2 years, so just trying to catch up with everything.
So I imagine you have to deal with lots more than just bridges in your inventory then.
Yeah, we've got bridges and box culverts both that we have to deal with.
Excellent. Well, welcome today, Andrew. Aaron Skolik.
Pretty close. Sokolik. I am with the City of Lincoln also, and I oversee the City of Lincoln's asset management section. And so I'm just really looking forward to the presentation today to learn more about, it's all about budgets. So some of those things we can do to help our bridges.
Yeah, I haven't had anyone come on the line yet and tell me they just have too much money and don't know what to do with it. Right? Everyone's trying to pinch pennies and figure out the way to maximize it. So yeah, we definitely can touch on that today. James Pulls.
James Pulse, City of Lincoln. Anyways, yeah, I'm in construction. I've been in the bridges for probably 10 years now. Team leader for the City of Lincoln for, I think, 5 or 6.
Excellent. So it sounds like we have some folks from the City of Lincoln. So I do think we'll have plenty in the presentation that'll be a benefit to you guys. I guess I would also like Greg, go ahead and introduce yourself. Greg is my co-chair of this working group.
I'm Director of Business Development with QuickBond Polymers. I've been involved with construction-related materials as it relates to roads and bridges for almost 30 years. Travis and I are both sit on the Federal Highway Bridge Preservation Expert Task Group, pretty active with the regional partnerships, also co-chair of the National Bridge Deck Preservation Working Group on the TRB Bridge Preservation Committee as well. And so I've been pretty active involved with bridge preservation for quite a few years, and Travis and I have worked together in various committees and different things over the years. This whole working group is really taken up, so we appreciate you folks getting on to join us today. Just want to say thanks.
Mitchell, I appreciate you setting this up today and giving us an opportunity to present. Do you have anything that you'd like to go ahead and say before we kick it off?
We just really appreciate you guys making this available to us. Sorry about the small group, but it's a good group. So I think they'll get a lot of benefit from what you guys are presenting. So just thanks for being here, and I know it's good information.
Yeah, and thanks for setting it up. When we first envisioned this intro to bridge preservation, it was really thought to be like a lunch and learn. That was back pre-COVID when people traveled, and when we thought that we would our partnership's national, and so we'd get someone from the partnership within that state to kind of come and give this presentation in person. Hopefully we'd partner with one of our industry members to kind of help give the presentation and also maybe provide some lunch. But obviously everything since March has changed drastically, and so now we're on to a digital format, and I think doing these in smaller groups is actually fantastic. So like I said, I would encourage you to speak up if you have any questions. With a group of this size, it's very easy to go ahead and unmute your microphone without us talking over each other, in a good format. We're all here today to talk about bridge preservation, and specifically geared towards local agencies. Just a quick overview of what we're going to be touching on today. It's the TSP2 Bridge Preservation Partnership. Give you a little background into what we are and why we're doing this. Go into asset management, how it fits within preservation, identify preservation candidates, developing and funding a bridge preservation project, developing a bridge preservation program, and then kind of run through an overview of the different activities. So it's quite a bit to cover in 60 minutes plus questions, and so we're not going to go into deep depth on any one of these, but at the end of the presentation, we'll give lots of additional resources where you can get an enormous amount of information. Most of it's actually free and readily available. And so the whole point of this is to get the information out to as many people as possible, and to help them manage their inventory the best they can, stretch those budgets. Greg and I, we co-chair this working group for local agencies. The whole point of this working group was to really engage at the local level. So the TSP2 Bridge Preservation Partnership, it's composed of state owners like myself. You do have county and city engineers. You have lots of industry. You have lots of academia. FHWA participates in it. And so it's this great kind of collaboration that happens. But we noticed that although we really had a strong support from our DOT members, we weren't really hitting the nail on the head for a lot of our local agency participants. And so this working group was formed specifically to try and engage more at the local level, encourage preservation and participation within the program. Partnership, it's really focused on preservation, how to extend the useful life of your bridges. I love how it is a collaboration of industry and owners. There's not a lot of opportunities where you can go ahead and show up to a meeting with, I always go to these meetings with a laundry list of my problems, specific ones, bridges that I'm not really sure what to do with, or even a statewide problem that we're trying to work on. And then I can go and sit down at a table with representatives from Alaska and Vermont and just a whole wide range of different owners, and then I can also have all the industry and all their competitors at the same table too. So you can really shop around to find that really strong solution and that collaboration approach. Greg, who introduced himself earlier, he's a great example of this. I mean, the industry members through this partnership and the way it's set up is it can't just be a sales pitch. It's not just here, buy my product because it's better than X, Y, and Z. It has to be this collaborative effort to get you towards a good solution to your problem. And so having that set up is just something that I found to be tremendously valuable. I try really hard to maximize the partnership to reduce my effort at my own job.
Yeah, I mean,
so asset management plan. Yeah.
Well, the only thing I was going to add is that there's, Travis mentioned a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of case studies and a lot of presentations of problems that have come up over the years, and maintenance crews have come up with, unusual ways to fix these problems. And so those discussions, that seems to be kind of the main thing that's happening at these meetings, is like, problem solving kind of stuff.
Not trying to reinvent the wheel. If someone else already has a solution, there's a good chance it'll work for you guys as well. I love this slide. It's exactly what I think of every time when someone mentions to me their asset management plan. I have all these problems that I'm trying to narrow in on, and then they just kind of always reference back to, well, just have an asset management plan and you're good to go. So you got your forest, you got your trees, and then someone's asking, where's the forest again, right? Where do we really start on getting something that's tangible and useful to our inventories? This is the federal definition for an asset management plan: strategic and systematic process of operating and maintaining and improving physical assets. You're going to focus on engineering and economic analysis, identify a structured sequence of maintenance, preservation, repair, rehabilitation, and replacement actions. The overall goal is to just minimize your costs, right? So seeing a desired state of good repair. You got a bunch of good structures in your inventory at the minimum possible cost. This definition actually kind of reminds me back of the previous slide, where again, I read through it and it sounds pretty straightforward, but then again, where do you really start? What does it mean? I like this. This breaks it down for me a little bit better. Asset management plan. I can think of it as these three factors, right? I have replacements, which are at the bottom in red because we don't like them. Very expensive. You get a brand new structure when you're done, but you can usually only fund a handful of replacements compared to your overall inventory, right? It's just very expensive to do. Oregon specifically has focused a lot on rehabilitation because we couldn't afford a lot of replacements. And so that's your kind of in-between tier there. That's the significant investment and just keeping something in service. You usually get a big increase in the condition of the bridge or the asset that you're investing in, but it comes at a pretty significant cost and usually a significant traffic disruption. And then in green up there at the top, your preservation, your preventative maintenance. Those are your actions that are kind of shown up there at the top with that bearing, right? That's just cleaning and painting. It's low cost, doesn't generally improve whatever's there. It just keeps what's ever there from getting worse. And so it's short-term, easy to do processes.
Yeah,
we'll kind of go into those a little bit more. So,
just so people know that particular slide came from the Federal Highway Bridge Preservation Guide, which is available online, and it could be a little overwhelming for trying to put an asset management plan together on a local level. But if you just want to take the time to peruse it, there's a lot of really good information within that guide.
Since it's published by the FHWA, it's a guide that's not only useful, but one that carries a lot of weight with it, right? If you go ahead and reference it to upper management, it's something that is a verified resource that you can kind of cite. You have your 3 legs of an asset management plan, right? I kind of mentioned bridge replacements are in red. Those are the ones that are the most expensive action. Generally on these, you're looking for your worst structure in your inventory. We see that this is a real focus, not just among states, but in particular local agencies, right? If you have a whole pile of bridges that need to be replaced and you only have funding to do a few of them, then all that funding gets dedicated towards this worst first approach. The goal is actually to have the bridge in the worst condition, because then you get selected for replacement with those limited dollars. And so this is termed the worst first approach, right? You actually get a reward for having the worst bridge in inventory. The problem is there's too many of them, right? The cost to replace all these worst bridges, or these poor bridges, is estimated at $26 billion. It exceeds the funding that is available. Bridge replacements, although you end up with a nice shiny new bridge, get a ribbon cutting at the end, it's also very disruptive, right? Replacing a bridge, unless you can build a detour, is, even with the detours, it can be very disruptive to the traveling public. And it takes a long time. If you have a structure that's fallen into that worst, that very poor category, it can be a decade before the funding becomes available and the project's planned, it's designed, and then it's actually bid and constructed, right? It's a very long timeline for bridge replacements. Bridge rehabilitation, this is kind of our in-between activity. It's still probably a large-scale project. You're probably not going to do this with local agency forces. This is stuff that's going to be put into a large contract, hopefully with some federal funding. And a lot of times it's reserved for bridges that have like one component with significant deterioration, but the rest of the structure is really worth saving. So when you invest in a bridge rehabilitation, you're saying this bridge is really worth saving in the long run, because we're going to put this high value initial upfront cost into keeping the structure in service. So it's something where the bridge is wide enough, it's serving traffic well, it's really worth keeping in your inventory. You'll do that large investment for rehabilitation. Again, these can end up impacting traffic quite a bit. Bridge preservation, what do we mean by that? So these are basically just actions or strategies that prevent and delay deterioration rate. It's not necessarily getting, you're definitely not getting a new bridge. You're not getting a bridge that's just been reworked to that rehabilitation level. The goal here is you keep your bridges that are in good or reasonably fair condition from getting worse. It's not very exciting. It can at times be kind of a hard sell to upper management, because you don't see that big shift in condition ratings. Everyone wants to see that big shift with that large investment. But again, the funding's just not available. So bridge preservation activities are ones that are very inexpensive, short-term traffic control, and they can significantly delay your good bridges from going into that poor group of bridges that need to be replaced. And we'll definitely get into much more of what that actually means. Coming up with hammering home the point of what's the difference between rehabilitation and preservation, I love to look at bridge decks. One, they're like really the only part of the bridge the public notices, right? If you get potholes or banging joints, you get phone calls with complaints about those. You have something going on in the substructure or the columns, unless it's something that's very drastic, the public just doesn't really see it. They don't really focus on it. So not only is it the one that the public sees, but it's also the one that's exposed to the most wear and tear. The roof of the bridge, so it's exposed to all of the de-icing chemicals, it's exposed to the rain and the snow, it's exposed to traffic. In Oregon, we allow studded tires, so we get a lot of wear and tear on our decks just from that. Highest value item. Also, if you want to do any work to the bridge deck, you have to take some traffic control into consideration, right? You have to take away a lane in order to fix it. So it's definitely something that's a good kind of I call it, it's the highest value component of the whole bridge. It's the piece that matters the most. And so we'll go through an example of rehabilitation versus preservation, specifically on the bridge deck.
I want to add to that photo real quick, because I was on this project. It was supposed to be, can you back up one slide real quick, Travis?
Yep.
It was supposed to be just a minor weekend patching project. And so what happened is they got out there with a chain to sound the areas of the deck to see what was becoming delaminated. And it was incredibly extensive, as you can see, a lot worse than they thought it was going to be. And the buses to take kids to school had to go over that bridge first thing Monday morning. So this was a perfect example of what happens when you really don't pay attention It ended up being a much bigger project and much more costly. And this was supposed to be a preservation project. It ended up being really a rehabilitation project because of the cost.
The preservation was simply too late. Rehabilitation, what does it mean when we're talking about that? So this is an example. So once you get into rehabilitation for a bridge deck, you're removing concrete. You're getting in there, you're grinding away section. You're going to go and do a large patching or casting back, maybe a whole new cementitious overlay. It's a significant disruption and a lot of work. When I go through and I look at costs for our work in Oregon, the thing that drives me not nuts, but the thing that's most frustrating about these rehabilitation projects is that when you look at the bid items that are actually work that's being put into the bridge, it's a small percentage of the whole project. Most of the cost goes into staging. We'll spend 50 to 60% of the entire project cost just to get access to the deck to do the work. That's because, at least in Oregon, we're usually looking at like a 7-day cure on our concrete overlays. And so with prep and everything else, I mean, you're closing that bridge down for weeks, if not even longer. And so it's how do you accommodate the traffic while you do that becomes a very big cost of the overall project. The other thing is until you can get the funding in place to do that work, it's a huge drain on your maintenance resources, right? So these are the decks where you're getting those big spalls coming off, kind of resembling potholes, and you're getting rebar into car tires and torque claims. It's a continual patching effort just to keep the deck in service until that rehabilitation can come through. So it's that getting too far behind, like Greg mentioned in the previous slide. If you have that deck where you thought you were going to be able to kind of just continue on with it and it starts blowing apart on you and you end up with that much level of patching, it really kind of forces your hand into doing some kind of action. The previous slide, we saw the grinder out there grinding off concrete. They're going to come back and pour new concrete. That's a rehabilitation. This is what preservation looks like. So this is an idea of a routine maintenance that you can do that would extend the life of a deck. This is a bridge deck that's in good shape, and here they're flooding it with a deck sealer. So the idea is that they mix it. They've got squeegees out here. They're squeegeeing it into the cracks. It's going to fill those up. It's going to keep the water and the salts from getting down to the rebar and causing the deck to blow apart. You can see it's very short-term traffic control. They just have a couple cones sitting out there. The hardest part I have with these projects and selling it to our maintenance crews is that no one's calling and complaining about this deck right now, right? The deck on the previous slide, they're getting calls and complaints saying, you need to get out here, you need to patch it, you need to fix this joint, you need to keep it so that I can drive over it safely and conveniently. This deck's not getting those same kind of public interest. No one's complaining about it yet. And that's a key point because you have to really kind of think about, well, but I can go and do this seal for, in a day with short-term traffic closure. And, in Oregon, these are less than $2 a square foot. I can extend that bridge deck for, another 5-10 years of service without having to get to those patching. But it's not an immediate problem in front of me. And so it's kind of trying to think about how to change our thinking of trying to get ahead of that curve, preserve it so that it doesn't get so bad. I mean, you have to kind of do this work.
Hey, can I throw a quick backstory? I was working with this crew in Southeast Idaho, the District 6. This is their actual maintenance crew, and they're kind of tucked away in Southeast Idaho, away from Boise, where the state capital is. And so they had a microsilica overlay that was delaminating almost 20 years ago, and they sealed it and they bonded the thing back together. They were so enthusiastic about what happened that they went out, found money to buy a shot blaster unbeknownst to the folks in Boise, got their crews. They sealed over 200 bridges in their district. And when the state bridge engineer found out about this initially, they were pretty angry. They wanted to reprimand the guy that was in charge of making this all happen and how they were spending money. But what happened was within 6 or 8 years later, they realized that that particular district had the bridges were in the best condition of any of the other districts in the whole state. What Matt Ferrari, who's the state bridge engineer, still is at the time, said, hey, I wanted to give these guys an award. He goes, initially we wanted to kind of reprimand them, but they've actually deserved a reward at this time. So kind of a cool story. And
then it also kind of helps highlight that it takes some time to see the benefit of the preservation. So part of that's educating those that are the policymakers to say, look, this is a good idea and this is why. And sometimes you just have to wait to see how those preserved bridges perform so much better than the ones that you didn't preserve. The benefit of bridge preservation, like I just kind of alluded to, it's easy to understand, but it's kind of difficult to quantify. I just said you go through and preserve something and it doesn't actually change its current condition. It keeps it from getting worse faster. So this becomes challenging when a lot of policymakers want to see that immediate bang for their buck, right? Even if it's a much smaller bang for the buck, they see that number increase, right? You go from a bridge that's in a very poor condition to a new bridge that's in great condition, right? That gets people excited, even if it's a very little return on your investment, right? You're putting all your money into just that one. And the effectiveness of preservation, it can really vary on what you're preserving and where it's at. So the climate makes a difference. Stuff in more extreme climates certainly benefit more from being preserved. If you're in a very benign climate, then it's still a good idea to preserve those structures, but the cycle may be different, maybe further out. The structure type, current condition, if you're in a bridge that's already in kind of relatively poor condition, it might be hard to get good, effective preservation treatments. I like to kind of go to the extreme examples of this. An extreme example where 100% of agency funds is spent on preservation projects only, right? So not a dime on replacement. At the end of all those fundings, there would be zero net improvement to bridge condition inventory. This is that struggle of trying to sell the benefit of preservation. It's easy to conceptualize, but it's really hard to sell at times. And what you have to do is kind of educate those to get out of that worst first mentality and try and get a balanced program where you're preserving the structures that are worth preserving at very low cost, and then you're replacing the structures at a reasonable rate on the back end.
Can I throw a real quick kind of backstory in here?
Yeah.
Is the state of Utah, which is where this photo was taken, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, kind of this guy, Dave Eisenberger, I think he was a state bridge engineer. He was kind of a champion of preservation actions, and he got involved with promoting preservation and various overlays and deck sealing projects throughout the state of Utah, and with some fairly high level of success. And then a few years later, Travis and I were at the Western Bridge Preservation Partnership, and this guy, Josh Slutton, who was the assistant state bridge engineer, gave a presentation that was shared with legislature about how efficient and effective their preservation program became. And what they did is he put it all in graphs and charts. And Travis says it's hard to understand and qualify or quantify the benefits of preservation. But after that period of time, they were able to quantify the value, and they went to the legislature and were able to up the funding for preservation to $12 million from, I think it was under $5 million. They looked at the benefits, they showed them to the legislature, and they basically quadrupled or whatever, even more than that, or something. You know, they got a lot more funding for preservation, being able to demonstrate that.
Right, communicate it and then get that money. One of the ways I like to try and communicate preservation versus rehabilitation is to use a car analogy. The life cycle and the maintenance requirements for cars aren't drastically different than that of bridges. So when I'm talking about preservation on bridges, I'm talking about, washing bridges, maintaining joints, sealing, and we'll go through a whole lot of activities of different things you can do. On a car, that's kind of like getting your oil changed, washing the car, rotating the tires, getting the transmission serviced. Kind of that idea that, well, I really should preserve my car, right? I should maintain it so that I don't end up having to do those engine rebuilds, the body work, tire replacement early, and transmission replacements. Changing the oil in your car doesn't improve that immediate condition of your car, but we can all understand that, even though most of us aren't mechanics, and I certainly am not one, that if I don't ever change the oil in my car, I'm going to get to that engine rebuild much faster than if I don't. That's the same idea with your bridge deck. If you seal your bridge deck on a regular cycle, you'll avoid that deck rehabilitation. It's interesting that it's a very easy concept to get through for car owners. We all know most of us don't change our oil on that really steady cycle, but we know that if we don't do it, there's a consequence on the back end. And so I use this car analogy a lot to kind of look at what happens if you don't take care of your bridges in a timely manner. We keep saying preservation, preservation, preservation. What is preservation? So these are just some common examples of things that we're talking about. These are your deck treatments, your sealers, and your thin overlays. Keep the water out of your deck. Even just washing the bridge to remove debris can really extend the life, especially around the beam ends and bearings. Cleaning out your joints, making sure that they're still watertight. some painting of steel structures. When you get into a full overcoat painting, that's probably more of a rehabilitation action because it's a much larger project, but even spot painting in isolated areas is definitely a good preservation maintenance level activity. Patching the concrete to keep the deck serviceable and other members, and then using waterproofing membranes when you pave on asphalt. Does the city of Lincoln, do you guys have asphalt on your bridge decks?
Travis, this is Zach Becker. I'm our bridge program manager for the city of Lincoln. We currently do not have any asphalt overlay. We're going to be applying our first two probably next year and the year after. So it's very new to us.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So in Oregon, we have a kind of a half and half-ish mix. I'm actually not a huge fan of having asphalt over the top of our bridges, just because it seems like it needs to be replaced much more frequently than some of our other treatment options. When we do have asphalt, which we have quite a bit, we like to include some sort of a membrane to try and help keep the water off of the concrete deck. Something definitely to look at when you're going into adding those overlays.
Does the city of Lincoln have maintenance crews to do any maintenance activities?
We are definitely more of a reactive maintenance than a proactive at this point. Our asset management program, we've been working with our street maintenance group, but we're really just trying to get better at that. And it's sort of still a new thing to us, but we do have maintenance crews.
One thing I was going to add, and Travis, I don't know if we have any reference to this, but the Federal Highway folks, and we were involved with this process, created some pocket guides that are now phone apps for some of these preservation actions, and they're available in kind of a checklist format. So if you have maintenance crews and you want to perform some bridge washing or patching or deck sealing or something like that, your maintenance crews can pull the app up on their phone and go through the checklist, make sure they have all the right tools and equipment and the surface preparation, and it's really very detailed, point to point, step by step method. So anybody in any kind of maintenance crew that performs activities at all can easily follow and perform these actions with this phone app.
And we definitely do have references to those at the end of the presentation, Greg, and then we'll make the presentation available as well, so you guys can have those resources for sure. Once you look at what are the, why do preservation, if we get past that first hurdle, we want to maintain the bridges. Now it's starting to look at what bridges should we be looking at maintaining. So there's a few different categories. There's going to be these high value bridges. This is the historic McCullough Bridge in Coos Bay, Oregon. It's a beautiful bridge. It's 5,400 feet in length. It was constructed in 1936. Just the aesthetics of this bridge is of a nature that's so historically significant to Oregon that we have to maintain this bridge forever. Like, we'll never want to replace this bridge. And so it's obviously a candidate for preservation. Also, just the size of the structure is so big that we could never afford to replace it, at least not easily anyhow. Obvious candidate, right? Slam dunk, that's definitely one for preservation. These aren't the ones, though, that we're really trying to weed out, right? These are the ones that kind of stand out to everybody. General public gets the message. These are the ones that are easy to preserve. The ones that we really want to focus on, from my perspective of just maintaining the overall inventory, are the ones that are in relatively good condition. And so it doesn't have to be that beautiful, massive, historic bridge that makes it worth preserving. It just needs to be a bridge that's serving its purpose and hasn't fallen into a state of disrepair yet. This graph here is also out of the FHWA preservation guide. And it's really showing us that this area in green, this good, and then a little bit into the fair range, those are the bridges that are great candidates to preserve. You'll get a lot of bang for your buck in keeping them in service. Once they start to get in a little worse condition, you get that fair to poor range. Preservation may be a benefit, but certainly not at the same rate. Once your bridge really starts deteriorating on you, kind of doesn't matter a lot what's the method or the mechanism for deterioration. It's going to progress rapidly, right? It starts to kind of grow exponentially as your bridge condition continues to drop and you get towards that bridge replacement. Once you have a bridge that's in very poor and severe condition, it really is not going to help you a lot to go and throw a sealer on it or to wash it, because at that point your bridge is probably lost and it really needs either a massive rehabilitation or more likely a replacement. So it's really trying to focus in on those better bridges and keep them in service for longer. You already have a lot of data at your fingertips for this. The National Bridge Inspection data will help get along that path for looking for those good bridges. I would caution against focusing just on the NBI data, which was what was shown in this previous chart, right? Good, fair, poor, those are NBI, deck, super, sub ratings, and get down into the element level data. That's where you can really kind of go into the bridge components and look at your cracking in your deck elements, your leaking joint condition states, and start to really train in on very specific projects that can be addressing those defects. In Oregon, we're having defects that are assigned to all of our element level data. And so the inspectors will put on their SPAL, that cracking, and I'll just go and search the database for those defects, or hopefully the maintenance recommendations, and start pulling those out as we prioritize our work for the year. Developing a bridge preservation project. One of the first things to look at is this stuff that can be completed in-house with those maintenance forces that you have, or do you need to put it into a contract? There are a lot of products and applications that can be done without a whole great level of skill set or a lot of equipment costs, right? There's a lot of stuff here where it's a 5-gallon bucket or a big trash can and a mixer and squeegees, right? Stuff that you can pick up at a local Home Depot. There's other stuff that's going to be higher, more technical expertise, and that would be more suited for contract. Regardless, if you're going to contract work, I would strongly suggest looking for ability to bundle it, right? Preservation projects are usually of those smaller scale, using decks as the example. To go seal a deck in Oregon, typical deck, 5,000 square feet, that's probably in that ballpark of $10,000 to complete with our crew forces. Not a huge cost for that one deck. If I put that out into a contract, I would probably get some bids on it, but it wouldn't be for $10,000. It would be for a much higher rate, because it'd have to make it worth that contractor's time to actually go through the process of doing that. You also pay a little more overhead in contracting work, because you have to go through all the plans and specifications. Instead of just handing one of the maintenance crews that pocket guide or some other reference material to just go and do the work. So do think about that if you decide to contract it, to bundle it. I would encourage, especially since you guys are kind of talking about that beginning phase of maintenance of this bridge work, to do some work in-house. I watched a great presentation at the Pacific Northwest Bridge Maintenance Conference, where there was a local agency. He had no crew members at all. He really wanted to install an epoxy overlay on one of their bridge decks. He was adamant that it was a good bridge deck to save. He had concerns with the number of salts that were being applied to it and wanted to extend it. But he had no crew forces at all, and it was just one bridge, so he didn't think that they could contract it. He actually went and got with the inmates, the inmate crew. He was the supervisor for the project and used those workforces to actually install the entire overlay and gave a presentation on it. So it can still be done in-house even if you don't have your own forces. You just have to be very creative.
Hey, Travis, I want to add to that real quick. In the state of Idaho, I've worked with years ago, their inmate crews on a regular basis. It was real common practice to use inmate crews for preservation actions. But the other thing I wanted to add to that, a good example would be if you do have a small crew, or even if you don't, the industry folks that are involved with the regional partnerships are really happy to come out and come to, like, say, come visit with your folks and show you hands-on how to use their products. They're really active in that way. In this LTAP group in Indiana, they do that quite often. They'll bring the industry folks in to do demos, and you get various counties and cities come together, and they'll put on these demos and little kind of rodeos. And that's very common. And so that's something, if you guys are interested, all you have to do is reach out, and we can reach out to our industry folks within you'd be the Midwest Partnership or whatever, and they'd be happy to come out and demonstrate various materials.
And we've had a lot of success with that in Oregon too. Even our more experienced crews, if we're doing a new product, even though the installation may be very similar to the products that they're used to, the reps are usually very willing to travel because they want to see that product be successful. Right? It's in their best interest not to sell it to you once, but sell it to you a bunch of times, which means it has to work. So we always invite the rep out and just ask if you're going to be around and you're available, please come and give us a demonstration. And then we'll actually invite other crews over to come and watch it as well. Even though they may not be installing it then, it may be something for them to look at in the future. Definitely some great contacts through the TSP2 partnership for doing that. funding bridge preservation. It can convince you that it's worthwhile to do and kind of help show where the projects are, but if the funding's not available, then we don't get very far. The federal funding is actually stepped up behind this. With the Moving Ahead for Progress and the 21st Century Act, MAP 21, and the Fixing America's Surface Transportation FAST Act, they recognize the benefits, the government recognized the benefits of bridge preservation and made it all eligible for federal funding. There is federal funding that could be available for this. So some of the actions that are specifically called out are things like bridge washing, cleaning drains, joint cleaning, sealing concrete. These are cyclical activities, so these are ones that you aren't necessarily a reactionary, but it would be something you try and put onto a schedule. Every year I'm going to clean this bridge deck, and every 5 years I'm going to seal the concrete, some kind of a cycle. I will admit, even in Oregon, totally bought into the preservation and the cyclical activities and the benefit they could bring. We are still very reactionary in Oregon as well. Right, so it's something to strive for, something to consider as trying to set up, but I totally understand the constraints that Lincoln City is under and us as well, where you can actually, it's just hard to get out of that reactionary mode. Getting a cyclical maintenance is definitely one way to do it. The list goes on, it gets much longer. So these are more condition based. So these are where you actually have a defect and you're correcting that defect through some level of preservation. So you're repairing the drain that's broken, you're overlaying a deck either with asphalt. If you include the waterproofing membrane, then it counts as a preservation activity. Thin polymer epoxy overlays, those are something that Oregon has really embraced and we've really got a lot of mileage out of. I'll show an example of what those are, but it's basically just about 3/8 of an inch thick. It has aggregate mixed in with epoxy on the bridge deck, and it actually gives you a whole new wearing surface and prevents water and salt from getting into it. Out of curiosity, are you guys aware of any of the thin polymer epoxy overlays on bridge decks in the Lincoln inventory?
We have done some silica fume stuff in the past, no thin overlays to date. The state has done some in our area, so we are aware of them, but still we haven't gotten to it yet. I'm working on it right now.
The silica fume overlays, we definitely have a lot of those in Oregon. Those are what we would call a rigid overlay. They definitely have a purpose. I usually put them more of a rehabilitation than just preservation, although I guess they can be in both categories. The one thing I like about the thin polymer epoxy overlays is that we're installing those at around $4 a square foot, where those silica fume overlays are much, much more. And we're seeing some really good results out of them. So a good low cost, low tech process. And again, I'll go over a bunch of different of these actions later in the presentation. I just wanted to give an idea of just for how big the list is, and it continues on, right? There's more and more that all qualify as preservation. These qualify for federal funding. When we were developing this presentation, we kind of, we said, well, this all qualifies, this is what's going on. And then we said, okay, let's go ahead and grab a handful of our local agencies that have been active with us, and we'll go ahead and use them as examples for just how great that funding is for doing this preservation work. Well, I have 3 question marks on this slide, and the reason is because, boy, it's really hard to find examples of that federal funding going towards preservation, in particular at the local level. We recognize that this is a problem. The feds have also recognized that this is something to look into. Greg and I are part of this FHWA expert task group, and they've actually formed an investigation specifically to look into barriers associated with using federal funds for preservation. And a lot of what we're seeing is that that big federal state funds that the locals compete for really gets locked into that worst first approach for an awful lot of what's happening. We're trying to work with agencies that have already got their hands on that fund to use as examples, and also trying to look into ways that maybe our group and in cooperation with that expert task group can start to look at changing the system a little bit to make those funds more readily available and easier to use for preservation activities. I will say that the bulk of the preservation activities, the real success stories that we have seen, are the locals generating their own revenue to do these lower cost activities. And so we hope to include a lot more on this in the future. Definitely ways to get your hands on state funds for preservation and hopefully federal funds. But right now, the best examples we have are those that have bought into the process at the local level and generated their own revenue to do these low cost activities.
I want to add real quick what Travis was talking about. One thing that we noticed is that local agencies that have been successful in accessing funds for preservation often have a champion, somebody who really believes, usually it's one person who really believes in preservation, and somehow they connect the dots and create a channel for funds to trickle down for these activities. And so another aspect of this case study, we're hoping to determine what are the trends in which these champions around the country that work with local agencies have been able to access funds, and are there certain kind of trends in which they followed. And between trying to get the federal highway making federal funds more easily accessible, also trying to make it easier for locals to get a hold of funds based on what other local agencies have been doing around the country.
Definitely recognize that funding is a critical piece of this effort, and it's something that we are getting on it. One of the things that's been pointed out is that if your asset management plan focuses or is geared to encourage that state of good repair, having that sustainable replacement, sustainable preservation, maintaining your assets to the lowest cost, then it's going to, that asset management plan will just help highlight the need for the preservation to be included as part of that plan. Right? There's no good asset management plans out there that just say only replace the bridges in poor condition and focus all funding on that. We really think that those asset management plans and if there's any bridges from Lincoln City that are on that national highway system, they would be included as part of the state's required asset management plan. But even at the local level, it's great to have a plan that kind of helps bring it all together. Bridge preservation program, we got a wheel here that covers 11 different steps. This is from that federal FHWA bridge preservation guide. We've already discussed quite a few of these steps, right? We've gone through the identifying preservation actions. We've looked at selecting projects, evaluation of benefits, and looking at the funds. It's a lot of steps here. We won't go through all of them during this overview, but kind of wanted to at least show that there is some nice graphical breakdowns to show how this can be done. Establishing agency rules to achieve goals. So cyclical maintenance, examples for bridge decks in good condition. So these are your bridges that maybe are in that NBI range of 6 and greater. Sweeping, crack sealing, the polymer overlays that we talked about, and asphalt with waterproofing membranes. Obviously, budgetary restraints will limit our ability to do that. Condition environmental factors will drive a lot of the frequency here. If you have a deck that's just constantly getting impacted with debris, and then you might have to be sweeping and washing more frequently. But these are just kind of a general idea of some ideas for those intervals that might get you into that state of good repair. So measuring the benefits, there's been tons of work that's taking place on how do you show the benefit of preservation. We've already come out and said straight up, it is difficult. It's hard to show that change in condition because a lot of preservation actions don't jump the condition significantly. A lot of times it just delays the rate of deterioration. However, some stuff does. So say the thin polymer overlays, those are actually an overlay that goes over the bridge deck, still low cost preservation treatment. You can show that it actually increases the bridge's condition and then show on a chart how it actually increases the service life. So this is all based on predictive deterioration models. There is a lot of research that's out there already on this, and actually a lot taking place now to truly kind of show in a deterioration model the benefits of preservation for different activities. But again, you'll see here that the action was taken while the structure was still in a relatively good condition. So you get that jump back up and delay that drop off of the curve.
I'll add, we have a partner that's in the expert task group with us, and she's working with the state of Wisconsin right now, analyzing the full inventory of value of preservation actions, and she has this term called time and condition state, which is basically what's demonstrated in this particular chart. And so she's going through the whole inventory and looking at various preservation actions and how they extend the time within the good and fair condition state. And so that's one way in which, on a national level, there's this big emphasis to qualify or quantify the value of these preservation actions. So I think in the next 10 years, we're going to start to be able to attach values to various preservation actions. But then, in Lincoln, Nebraska, for example, you may not use as much de-icing chemicals or have extreme freeze thaw, or you might not be next to a, ocean where there's a lot of atmospheric chlorides and things like that. So you'll be able to modify those for your particular region and manage your inventory appropriately long term.
Monitoring and reporting is a very key piece. This is a graph that Oregon uses a lot. We report it out every year. We just kind of show the progression of our structures, right? As they move from that green towards the red, from left to right, they're deteriorating. And then from right to left is our actions that are taken to improve the condition of those bridges. We know that our preservation is effective when the flow is balanced or even trending towards the left. So we're having more bridges that are in that good condition, at least really slowing down the rate that the bridges go from that cyclical maintenance, that green towards the yellow, and certainly trying to stay out of the red where your bridges have fallen into poor condition. Just showing this graph frequently can really kind of help show the benefit of preservation. On this next slide, this is from Michigan. Along the vertical axis is the number of bridges that flowed into the poor category. Okay, so this is for the state of Michigan. Here's your poor category, right? Everything's flowing to the right. On the vertical axis here, that's the rate that they're going there. And then on the y-axis is the year. And so Michigan in '98 passed a significant gas tax increase with funds that were actually earmarked towards preservation and maintenance. They said, we don't want to just replace the poor bridges, right? They're seeing this huge uptick in the rate that these bridges are becoming poor. I mean, and gosh, in '99, they had almost 200 bridges fall into poor condition. It's a crazy high number, moving into that very poor category rapidly. And so they recognized they had to do something. And so in '98, they started focusing on that preservation and maintenance, keeping what they have in good condition. And then you can see that the trend line, as you kind of move towards 2016, now they're down to less than 20 bridges a year falling into poor condition. And so they've significantly slowed that flow of bridges going from good to fair to poor, and have shown that benefit here that they can take back to legislators and show, hey, look, this is the benefit we're getting from preservation. They are now got to the point where 30% of their entire bridge program budget goes towards preserving and maintaining their structures. So they've really bought into the value of it, and they've been able to actually show graphically just how well it worked. And you can see that as they started getting into preservation, that it didn't take a long time for this trend to really start moving down. So now we'd like to run through a whole slew of different preservation treatments. This is just meant to give you an idea of the different activities that are available, that are kind of, and an idea of just how hard or easy they are to accomplish. We'll also go to the additional resources that show a whole lot of different information on how to go way in depth on this. So this is just a brief overview to kind of give an idea. So we'll kind of start with the easiest stuff, right? Cleaning and washing. That's really pretty self-explanatory, but can provide some tremendous benefit to the bridge at a very low cost. Washington State has done a lot of research on this. In particular, they did some work that really helped from an environmental standpoint, especially when you're working below the deck and you're washing off the bridge. Well, that debris will fall down into the water below. There was some pretty tight environmental regulations, in particular in Washington and Oregon too. We piggybacked off their research. Said, hey, look, you got to contain all this water. That's a huge effort, right? That takes it from just using the fire hose and cleaning it off to full containment, having baker tanks and filtration, and just this huge deal. They went ahead and showed that if you measure upstream and you measure downstream and you clean at a reasonable cycle and you do it at the right time of the year, you can't measure the amount of contaminants that were put into the water. And that was something that was presented through this TSB2 partnership that Oregon piggybacked on pretty quick to actually get that benefit from. Some of the things that you need to think about when you're getting ready to do the cleaning is the accumulation of contaminants. You know, I just mentioned if you're on a good frequency, you're probably not going to be able to actually test that level of contaminants that go into the water. You only clean once every 50 years. Well, that may not hold true either. And so just some of the things to think about as you go and start to set up a cleaning and washing program. But I would highly recommend referencing some of that research that was done out of Washington State. Certainly methods of access is going to be something that's definitely something to look at if you're on an overpass, but certainly the bridge decks, you can block off your drains, you can get your and clean the bridge deck with very limited environmental exposure. Some steps to do before you clean: sweep the bridge deck, right? Get rid of much of the debris as you can while it's dry. Same thing with around your bearings and your joints. If you get a lot of that debris out before you start hitting it with the water, you can kind of get down into that level of this is not going to be washing off a lot of contaminants. Pressure washing, expansion joints are really important to keep clean, because the debris will kind of impact the joints and it'll lead to them failing much quicker than if they were cleaned out. It's a lot more work to replace a joint gland than it is to flush it out. Certainly the whole structure could benefit from being cleaned, but really, you know, if you focus in on the deck and then underneath your joints where you have your bearings, your beam seats, and then the beam ends will give you your most bang for your buck. So this is a very low technical, low cost activity. It can be accomplished with any number of in-house forces. I actually heard of us working with a local fire department to clean some of our trusses where they just kind of worked on using their fire hose. Cleaning the deck's important. Sealing. So these are penetrating sealers. Again, it's a very low cost, easy to apply activity. This one here is a penetrating sealer. It goes down with like a spray bar, as you can see in the photo here on the right. A lot of times these are a silane type of a product that actually seeps into the concrete and makes it beat up water. So it doesn't necessarily fill in the cracks, but it does make concrete repel the water as it hits. And of course, if you keep the water out, you're keeping a lot of the contaminants and chemicals out as well. It doesn't impact your skid resistance or your slip resistance with tires on it. And again, very low cost, very easy to do. There's other types of sealers as well. There's flood sealers where you're flooding the deck, and you're actually, in these ones, you're trying to actually get in and fill in the cracks. A lot of times these aren't actually being absorbed so much into the concrete as they are a crack filler. Definitely useful for keeping those salts and water from getting down to the rebar level, where you really don't want it, because that's what will start causing your decks to kind of break up and start cracking away on you. Sealing, we're kind of looking at, like if you use a rule of thumb, maybe a 5 to 7 year frequency. And again, you're looking at a pretty low cost investment. Thin polymer overlay systems. This is what I mentioned. We've been using lots of these in Oregon. We install them with the in-house forces and we contract them as well. These ones actually create a barrier on the deck. So you actually get that it doesn't just slow the rate of water and salts from getting down into the rebar. It actually makes that barrier. As long as the barrier is maintained, it actually gives you that almost a complete protection. And a benefit to these is the traveling public likes them because it looks like you have a new overlay, right? You do have a new overlay, but a new wearing surface. We've noticed that the skid resistance on these go through the roof, at least initially. They probably wear back down as they kind of polish up a little bit towards that original concrete deck, or maybe a little bit better than it. Choosing a good aggregate for the broadcasting can definitely make a difference. I think I have some installation photos of it. So these are typically an installation where you start off, it looks similar to a deck seal that we talked about, where you have a squeegee there and you have the epoxy going down over it, but then they broadcast aggregate into that epoxy while it's still soft before it is actually tacked over and set. And that aggregate kind of is what forms that skid resistance, that wear resistant, that lets these things last for a long time. Again, the costs on these are relatively low. I know in Oregon, we're kind of in that $4 a square foot range for these type of an overlay systems. So maybe double your cost of a deck seal, just sealing up the cracks, but you also, with this, you actually get a new wearing surface that is intended to last for quite some time. This photo just shows on the left-hand side, they've installed the overlay. So you have that nice new kind of looking wearing surface. On the right, they're still getting ready to do the overlay for it. This is short-term traffic control. You install, the second lift is done when the first lift is done. So you do 2 different lifts to get you to that 3/8 inch of a thickness. This is a reference to the pocket guide that Greg had mentioned. And Greg, maybe you want to jump in and run through this slide here.
A lot of content on various slides called the pocket guides. The pocket guides are published in PDF form on the TSP2 website. I don't know if we have time to show that right now, but I think there's a slide later in the presentation that shows how to access the PDF form of these pocket guides. They're free. They don't cost anything. They went through a lot of oversight and review before they were published. They're very intensive. They're in a checklist format, which makes it really easy if you're a crew, or even if you're developing a specification and you want your inspectors to understand what's taking place, and the contractors come out, the inspectors have a checklist. They can kind of, even if they're not familiar with the process, they can work through with the contractor to make sure that they're following the best practices. So these pocket guides are really an excellent tool. They're free. They don't cost anything. They're available in a phone app as well. One thing I'll add, in my history involved with these various preservation activities as a material supplier, what typically is the cause of failure has to do with miscommunication between the development of the specification, the bid documents, the contractor not understanding best practices. And so these pocket guides really fill in all the blanks with that. And the other thing is if you have a maintenance crew, it gives them an opportunity to review the best practices. So it's really a great tool. If you don't have access, if you have some actions that you don't see a pocket guide, I would say get your manufacturer's reps involved and make sure that they're there to work with inspectors and work with contractors to make sure these products are installed correctly, because it's your money, and you want to make sure that these activities perform the way they're designed.
One thing I like about this photo here is it kind of shows just how low tech this solution is, right? You have garbage cans, you got some 5-gallon buckets and a mixer. The installation process is not significantly more than this. You can get into some pretty fancy equipment where you have this Venturi blowing the aggregate out for you that makes nice products. You can also install these overlays with your broadcasting the aggregate with like a fertilizer spreader or a hand broadcast spreader. So these are low-tech solutions that can be done by lots of folks, and especially if you use good installation practices shown in these pocket guides, you can get really good performance out of them. Sealing asphalt, at least in Oregon, we have 3 different types of membrane systems that we use with asphalt. There's the spray applied membranes, which is a polyurea. Typically, there's a polymer membrane, which is very similar to the thin overlay that we just showed. We just install it before the asphalt. And then there's the rolled membrane solution, which is a fabric type of a membrane. I think I'm going to just run through kind of some ideas of what the rolled membrane installation is. Part of that is, so I'll back up real quick. So the spray applied membranes, those are typically going to be done under contract. They do require some specialized equipment. A lot of times they're usually installed with specialized equipment. It would be possible for crews to install these on their own. However, certainly in Oregon, we do not, and I'm not familiar with other states doing them. I would call them maybe more of a Cadillac of the membrane systems. They do seem to perform quite well. However, they come with a pretty significant cost compared to the other 2 options. So since we're kind of talking about and trying to encourage low installation at the in-house level, I'm going to run through the rolled membrane solutions because these are the easiest ones to put down. And so here's an example of a crew. This is one of the Oregon crews installing a rolled on membrane. Really is just like it sounds. It's a fabric that goes down. You roll it out. You can see this one has an adhesive backing on it. And so the person in green is pulling that backing off. So they're going to go ahead and adhere it down to the deck. They overlap their splices. It's really kind of a straightforward thought of trying to just basically put in a rubberized kind of material into the asphalt so that you keep the water from getting down to the deck. And here they are, they're paving over the top of it. Low cost, we're kind of in that $2-3 a square foot range. Of course, it varies depending on the product selected, but relatively low cost and definitely relatively low skill level to get installed. Joints have a whole wide range of different kinds of repairs. A lot of times they end up with replacements. They get broken up. Joints are one of those things in the preservation community that get picked on a little bit, right? Everyone kind of can point to joints that have failed, some that have failed prematurely. They tend to be very sensitive to being installed correctly, right? A lot of these joints are being kind of glued or an adhesive into place. And so anytime you do something like that, you know that it's not a mechanical interlock. It actually needs to be prepped correctly and done well. The whole purpose of a bridge joint is to allow the bridge to move, right? It moves under thermal cycles as the bridge expands when it gets hot and it shrinks when it gets cold. You don't allow for that movement, then you can cause some really significant damage. I've seen where the bearings and the anchors have been dragged as the bridge kind of bound up and pushed itself. And we started falling off concrete on the supports where those anchors were embedded, because the forces are so tremendous that they're just going to move, and whatever's in their way will get broke. Aside from being impacted and causing that damage, if your joint just leaks, well, then you get all the debris and the other stuff that you've been trying to seal the deck and prevent from getting to the deck from getting down. Now it gets down through the joint and onto everything that's down below, and can cause some serious problems down the road. Fortunately, bridge joints can be pretty effectively maintained. You can go through and clean them. The photo on the left is a crew installing a new gland into a joint with armored corners. You can see there's a finger joint that's there on the right, where you actually have the steel fingers that kind of overlap and go into here. Those joints typically don't have glands with them, and so they're considered like an open type joint. But still maintaining them can help with plows and any other damage you'd get. And then you can see on the photo in the middle, they're going through and saw cutting out a bunch of material and going to be putting in some new headers on there to improve the ride across. There are pocket guides for these. So as Greg had mentioned, pocket guides for the overlays. There's also ones for cleaning or washing bridges. And then this is for the expansion joints. It's really helpful to kind of help educate and get a good installation. Like I said, these are very sensitive to being done well. They are conducive to in-house forces. Definitely can do them with crews, but just at least need buy-in with the fact that skipping a few of the preparation steps can result in the joint failing almost immediately. And so it's just one that you just don't want to skip on, but it's not particularly complicated to do it well. Painting's another type of activity that's pretty common. This is showing an example of a full overcoat, so that's maybe not the best example there, but you have steel beams where you just have some paint filling on the end, doing a good removal and cleanup, and then just touch painting the end can give you a lot of life out of the whole overcoating, extend the life of it. And here's some examples. So this is, again, another full containment kind of a project here, but what I like to show is the photo on the right here. That's called a needle gun. And so a lot of times those can be vacuum shrouded to contain lead and the debris, and work really well for localized paint removal and repair. And I think what they're doing here is trying to get into some of the crevices for removal. You want to perform the painting before, you want to do our maintenance painting before your bridge your overcoat gets in very poor condition, right? You got to get to it before it's failing all over the place. So spot painting can be very effective, but when it's not in particularly bad condition, good surface prep, similar to the joint work. If you don't do any prep and you just slap a coat of paint over some rusting crevices, it'll just rust right through the paint and won't stop. Definitely can be something done with local agency personnel, in-house forces. Good specification and training is vital on this one. Again, just because if you don't do it well, it'll fail quickly. Of course, a lot of our bridges have lead paint, and so also making sure that you're in compliance with environmental OSHA measures to keep workers safe is a key part. Concrete patching. This deck picture on the right is probably one that's no longer a good candidate for patching. I think this picture actually might have been out of Oregon. You can kind of see a variety of patching materials that have gone in there. It looks like the last ones are just that black cold mix asphalt repair material, which means that the crew really have given up on this one. So I like this picture just because it shows a lot of need for patching, but it's probably one that is past that condition of being a good candidate for preservation. It's probably more of getting into a full repair situation. But patching is done for a variety of reasons. Corrosion of the rebar is probably the #1 cause for big delaminations. You get that water and salts down to the rebar level, and it starts to form rust. When the rust expands, it expands significantly, and it'll just pop out the concrete. You can also have freeze-thaw cycles get and cause problems with concrete. Load stresses, so you have big overloads. We have problems with our new overlays and our new decks even having a lot of cracking just during that shrinkage cracking right after they're poured. I've also had problems with fires. You get a tanker truck catch on fire, or even just a standard truck that gets their diesel lit from their tanks catching on fire can certainly cause significant damage. Patching materials are replaced to restore the concrete cover. So you want to chip out and saw cut around the edges, get good prep. The things that you just kind of want to look at is, what are the conditions of this deck and why are you there to patch it? So some of those initial considerations will kind of influence in how you do your repair. Again, though, this is going to be something that's easily tackled with a crew. Site preparation considerations, obviously traffic control is a big one for anything that you're doing. It'll definitely make an impact to how quickly you need that repair material to set up. Some materials can set up very, very quickly and some take longer. And so something to think about. You need to make sure you have your tools and power sources available. For demolition, saw cut your edges if you can. Get down close to the rebar, but not into it. It'll give you that nice clean edge, as you see on that picture on the left, and then the one on the right's also saw cut to get that clean edge. You don't taper that patchy material down to very thin. Clean your rebar. There's little zinc anodes, which I don't see in this photo, but they're basically like a little hockey puck that have a zinc on it that you tie on with a tie wire, and it'll actually slow down the rate of corrosion. So the anode takes the corrosion instead of the rebar, and it'll keep it from spalling out again in the future, especially if you have a lot of salts in your deck. Just kind of, I know that was a lot. Quick overview of those different preservation techniques. Now I'd like to kind of go through additional resources. So this is the stuff where you can go and get a lot more information. There's the FHWA Bridge Preservation Expert Task Group. You'd already mentioned one of the efforts from that task group is to go and look into the funding barriers for local agencies. There's lots of other initiatives from that task group. The Bridge Preservation Guide, pocket guides, newsletters. A lot of these are going to be published on the TSP2 Bridge website. It's definitely one that I'm going to highlight here. I actually I can pull that website up here in a minute. The pocket guides. So if you go into either the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, and you can go and download these guides. They're completely free. You want to search for BC Pocket Guide or RBC Pocket Guide, and there's the TPO Pocket Guide. So if you kind of search for Pocket Guide, you'll start to see those come up. As Greg had mentioned, these are very, very useful. They're done just with the idea of trying to help people get good work out of their repairs, cost-effective work, and they're just free. They're available for anyone to download. I look at them as being like they're good. I'm an office person, so they're useful information for me to make sure I understand how the process goes. They're much more useful to those that are actually in the field that need to do this work.
Travis, real quick, can you back up 1 second to the last slide? Yeah, so what I wanted to add, these were the first 3 pocket guides that were available as phone apps. I think we've got a few more. I don't know if patching, joints, overcoat painting. There's a few more now, but anyway, the other thing I wanted to add is through LTAP, everybody that's involved with LTAP, as far as I know, has access to the AASHTO TC3 training program, and there's videos that the TC3 group made that are companions to these 3 preservation actions that have pocket guides, and they're really good videos. They're available for free. You can watch them at no cost through LTAP because you do have access to that TC3 training program, as far as I know.
I'll just show that here. So store.transportation.org, you got your TC3 curriculum. Most local agencies get opted in with their state's contribution, and so definitely something, a useful resource. Sorry, I see here that we'll kind of move it through a little quicker. The Bridge Preservation Partnerships. So there's 4 regional partnerships. They host monthly conference calls. If you're interested in that, please get a hold of us and we'll go ahead and get you set up to it. In addition to doing a little bit of business kind of work, there's also a tech topic that are on almost all the calls every month. You can submit your own tech topic. So if you have a problem, you can just do a quick 1-page summary. This is what I'm struggling with on a bridge preservation or repair issue, and you can get great input from a whole range of owners and industry to help you work on that problem. I use it quite frequently to kind of bail myself out of work. TSP2.org. So if you don't get anything out of the future resources other than this is your one-stop shop. TSP2.org. I'm going to actually pull up that website here. When you come to it, this is what it looks like. You have your website. It's the pavement preservation is one branch of TSP2, and then there's the bridge preservation. So obviously for locals, you have to wear many hats. So you will find a lot of great content underneath the pavement preservation. I'm going to take you to the bridge preservation component here. Here's your 4 regional partnerships along with contact information you'll find there to get engaged with those partnerships specifically. One of the things that I would definitely want to show is you have a whole range of different activities here. You have training links. There's a whole local agency bridge preservation training program where you can actually do a on-site training and contact information for that. You have a whole, here's your NHI bridge training courses. MnDOT has information out there. All this information is free. Some of them, like the NHI bridge training, could be a paid course, but just kind of a aggregate of a whole lot of information on this local agency page. Okay, this is the one I really want to show. So if you go here and go to library, video and PowerPoint presentations. So there's the 4 regional partnerships that meet once a year. And when they meet, they put together some great technical content. You have your owners, you have industry. As you go through here, you'll see there's a whole lot of different categories. Local agencies, you got painting and coatings. Let's go ahead and click on the local agency one. You have Indiana gave a presentation on local agency outreach, working group, maintenance program in Hillsborough County. Not only do you have kind of categorized here, but there's actually the recorded YouTube video of the presentation with the presenter. And you have a PDF to the PowerPoint presentation as well. I get feedback from a lot of different local agencies and state agencies as well that say that going through these different categories is a tremendous amount of information that's there available. It's all completely free. So again, looking at that tsp2.org is definitely something that you would want to look into. A couple more screenshots of kind of going through that local agency, the TSP2 website and the local agency information that we have there. See that I have come pretty short on time. So I think with that, here's my contact information. Feel free to email me with any questions that you might have. Again, I'm going to keep pushing that website, tsp2.org. All the content on there is free. It's an amazing resource, and it points you to a lot of the different resources that you have available to you to learn more about bridge preservation. I guess with that, I would like to open it up. Are there any questions from the group or things that you'd like to expand upon?
Travis, this is Zach again from the city. I like how you talked a little bit about the car analogy. I don't know in your experience, and maybe Greg, if you have experience with it, but do you find this analogy works for any level that you're trying to talk to, state, local, does it really matter? Or are there ways to kind of craft it better for like a local like we have? I think it's a great analogy and I want to try to use it.
I haven't tested it on everyone yet. However, I'm pushing it hard. So in Oregon, we're redoing our bridge condition report. And it's an amazing report, very detailed information, but it's really written towards folks like myself that work in the bridge community. And we recognize that we really need a better way of communicating our inventory, the work that needs to happen to that inventory to the public and even legislature. And we're going to use the car analogy to push it forward. We think that I think it expands even past just the needs for preservation, but it also helps to kind of communicate that, hey, look, we have a whole fleet of 1975 Celicas. They are technically a car, like our bridges are technically bridges. As you continue that older fleet of vehicles, you get posed with lots of challenges, right? You got to be willing to accept that they may not be as reliable as a new car, right? Just like our bridges may not quite be as reliable as the new bridges. I think it even goes into safety features, right? Old bridge rails versus airbags, right? You have that classic historic car that's worth preserving forever. Well, that would be like that McCullough Bridge I showed you, right? That's the one where it doesn't really matter exactly how much it costs to maintain. It's just worth maintaining because there's that historical value attached to it. And so I think it's an analogy that people kind of get because they're used to just knowing that they have to do work and repair work to their cars, even though they may not understand it entirely. They just have learned that that's what you need to do. And I think trying to extrapolate that base knowledge to bridges is something that is useful. So I'm hoping that we're actually in the process of drafting that car analogy to push for our legislature, our general public, and our upper management. If you want, send me your contact information. I'd be happy to share it with you once it's done.
I'm going to add something real quick because Travis talked about general condition rating, and if you're buying a used car, you look at the car, it's a nice car. Generally, it looks like a good car. It starts up, you drive it around the block. The general condition is good. And are you going to buy that car, or are you going to look into the element level? What's the transmission like? Has the oil been changed? Has it been maintained? So that's when you get into the element level. So if you really want to know if you're going to buy a car, if it's a good investment, and you want to get into the details and look at the elements. So that's another added aspect when you consider that analogy.
I do see we have one question in the chat window there from Brian Perry, and it was about outcomes for chain dragging versus a steel ball. I guess I haven't used the steel ball, but it's kind of the same principle, right? It's whether you're using a chain, a hammer, or some other kind of impact, you're just looking for that hollow sound to let you know where the defect is. Chain drag has kind of been a very popular way of looking for those D-lams, where the concrete is kind of separated off from that reinforcing steel but hasn't popped out all the way, so you can't just see it right at the surface. Just because you can take a chain and you can cover a lot of area pretty quick, and it's really a pretty noticeable change. And so usually what you do is use a chain drag to identify where there's a defect, and then usually you would go with something that's smaller and a little bit more precise, like a hammer, or I guess a steel ball would work just as well too, to kind of come up with the limits of where just is that defect. At least that's what I've seen. Okay, well, I would just like to thank everyone for being here today. We are offering PDH credits for this. We're still in the process of getting those sent out. They'll be coming from Michigan State University, is the one that's certifying this training as being a PDH or continuing education eligible through this particular setup. I know that you guys registered through the LTAP, and so Mitchell, we do have their email contacts, right? So we can send out those PDA certificates and links to where the presentation could be found later.
You bet. Yep, we can get it.
So we'll work with So we'll work with you to get that contact. I know the GoToMeeting app doesn't always get everyone's email. It's just based on what you set it up with originally. So we can do that, and we'll get those sent out hopefully in the next, I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks. We're still kind of new into this training, and so we're working out the kinks, but we will get them coming your way. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm not a salesperson. I don't work for TSP2. I work for ODOT. I just kind of am passionate about the benefits of this preservation and how it can help others, and just want to be available.
Thank you, Travis and Greg. A lot of good information. I'm especially excited about all the resources you shared. So we're definitely going to be looking into those and trying to get those across the state. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.